We're going to start all together tonight, and then we'll go into small groups, and then we'll head upstairs and finish off tonight. Asher and I moved the arsenal of Nerf upstairs, and we set up a little kind of American Gladiator type game that'll hopefully be fun tonight upstairs. So we'll find out who the sharpshooters are for sure within the group. But let me give you guys a little bit of a reminder, just kind of where we've been this semester, and kind of show you guys where we're going. We're getting close to really like the halfway point in the semester. And our hope this semester has really been to give you kind of a foundation for the whole Bible and understanding the story of the entire Bible. And so we began talking about the book of Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We went down kind of this decline in the story where we saw the people were wicked all the time. And that kind of was the flood story, the story of the ark. There's a place called Babel where the people try to build a tower that reaches up into heaven, and God comes down and confuses all their language, and they disperse throughout all these places. Then we met Abraham. We talked about Abraham a couple weeks ago and the promise that God made to Abraham, that he'd have a lot of offspring, that they would have this land to inherit, that they would be blessed so that they could be a blessing to other people. And then we saw that blessing kind of move through his son Isaac and Jacob, who we know as Israel, the 12 tribes, that crazy kind of family story. Out of that family comes Joseph, and we kind of know Joseph's story with the fancy coat, and his brother's not liking that, and so they sell him into slavery, and Joseph ends up in Egypt, which is a good thing because there's a famine in the land that his family was living in, and eventually his whole family, 70 people, come to live with him in Egypt. And then over the course of 400 years, that's really the first book of the Bible. This is all kind of Genesis. And then you turn the page into Exodus, and 400 years have passed, and the people of God have multiplied, and they're enslaved in the land of Egypt, and they start crying out to God, and God sends Moses, and Moses is who we talked about last week, how Moses comes and he delivers the people. He demonstrates God's power through these plagues, and then the people pass through the Red Sea. The Red Sea swallows up the Pharaoh's army, and the people wander through the wilderness for 40 years before they get into the promised land under the leadership of a guy named Joshua. And so today we're talking about 3 books of the Bible, really: Joshua, Judges, and the book of Ruth. You could also probably add the first 7 chapters of 1 Samuel in there as well. But this era of the Judges really begins with this unbelievable conquest. Like, in terms of military histories, the book of Joshua is a book that stands almost alone in terms of how we recognize the people of God, the people of this nation moving into the promised land and utterly vanquishing all of their enemies. Like, it's no contest, really. They just have victory after victory after victory after victory. And this kind of miraculous conquest of the land of Canaan, you would think would lead this group of people that had been slaves just a generation before, you would think it would lead them to just like say, man, God is awesome. Like, they would be praising God because they now start to realize that the promise that God had made all the way to Abraham was coming to its fulfillment. They had an entire nation, many offspring. They had come into the land that God had promised, and they had seen time and time again how God was blessing them. You would think that this people would be really, really strong in their faith, but I don't think these people were all that different than you and I. And often we find that our faith can be kind of fickle when we're most blessed, when things are going smoothly. It's almost like we forget who God is and we forget what God has done. And I just want you to think about that tonight. Why is it that oftentimes when we're most blessed, is our faith the most fickle? Like, why do we forget? Why do we not pay attention to God when things are going really well? This is what the book of Judges says. In Judges chapter 2, verse 11 through 13, it says that the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they served other gods. They abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the people who were around them, and they bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. It's almost like you would think, if you were in like a friendship with someone, or if you were in a relationship with someone, and that person was like just super great to you. Like they always brought in your favorite drink to school. They knew, like they when your favorite show was coming on, they would text you beforehand. They'd be like, hey, don't forget you don't want to miss your favorite show. Or like when you were doing something, like if you were in a band performance or you had a game or something, they show up in the stands, they'd be cheering you on. It's like, this person is such a good friend. This person is so faithful to you. And it's like all of a sudden you start to realize that you can kind of do whatever you want and that person will still be your friend. You have a very fickle friendship with them. You start to realize like, oh, I don't really have to treat them all that well. They'll still be my friend. Well, the same thing kind of happens in our relationship with God. Like God is so abundantly faithful with us. The word in the Old Testament that we see all the time is the word chesed. It's the idea of steadfast love. Like God's love for us never changes. It never goes up. It never goes down. It's always maximum love. Like he is unconditionally and infinitely in love with us. And sometimes because he's so good to us, because he's so faithful to us, we think we can just treat him however we want. Like it doesn't really matter. And that's what the people of Israel start to do. They start to forget how faithful God has been, and they start to worship these other gods. In fact, for the rest of the story, you're going to find that the people of God have a hard time showing the same type of faithfulness to God that God has shown to them. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Why is it when stuff is so good, when God has been so good to us, why is our faith most fickle? And then beyond that, we also recognize like, man, in times of stress and in times of frustration, sometimes we can get like super dependent on God, or we start crying out to God, much like the people did in Egypt, or much like the people did in battle. It's like when you're in bondage or when you're in battle, it's like, God, help me, help me, help me, help me, help me. But oftentimes when God does help us, when God does show up, then we're like, oh, that wasn't that big a deal. Not that big a deal. I could have done that. It was fine. You know, or sometimes things get so hard that our faith becomes really fragile. And it's like, God, why is this so hard? And we get mad at God for it. So it's both in the high highs and the low lows that we have a hard time staying faithful to God. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. When you're most blessed and when you're most stressed. Why is our faith sometimes so fickle? And why is our faith sometimes so fragile? And what we see in the books of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and the beginning of 1 Samuel, and really throughout the rest of the Old Testament, is that people have a hard time. They have both a fickle faith and a fragile faith, both when they're blessed and when they're stressed. So we'll just break up tonight. Girls, you can pick any spot you want. You can have any, you get first choice.
Let's take the spot from those chairs.
Because there's three of you guys. Why don't you guys take this one here? Max, who do you want tonight? You want to pick your group?
I'll take the older boys.
Older boys, you can go with Max across the hall. And then, Logan, you want to stay with us? You want to go across the hall? Your choice, ma'am. You with me? Okay. And then, guys, we'll stay right here. Just circle up in the chairs here. Right here. We'll do a circle of chairs.